Hello everyone. Before we jump in, make sure to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. That way, YouTube knows to keep sharing more stories like this with you. Now, let's get started. I remember that night more vividly than I want to. It wasn't even supposed to be anything special, just another night on the road. Me and my boyfriend were traveling, staying at whatever cheap hotels we could find, because we didn't want to blow money on anything nice. It was late, I was exhausted, and the only thing I had in my mind was taking a hot shower before crawling into bed. The hotel itself was one of those places that looked halfway okay from the outside, with a generic sign lit in red neon. But once you actually stepped inside, you could tell it had a history. Not the kind of history like it's been around for 100 years, but more like the kind where too many people have stayed there that had nowhere else to go. The walls had that faint smell of cigarettes, even though they claimed to be non-smoking. The carpet in the hallway was a dull maroon with random stains no one could explain. Even the way the doors lined up gave me a weird feeling, like each one had its own story, things that had happened behind them that no one ever really talked about. We checked in late, sometime close to midnight. The guy at the desk barely looked up when I signed the form. He just slid the key cards across the counter and muttered the room number. His shirt was wrinkled, hair greasy, and there was a faint trace of cigarette smoke clinging to him too. I figured he had seen too much, too many people checking in, too many people who didn't care what kind of place it was. The room itself wasn't terrible at first glance. A queen bed with mismatched pillows, a heavy comforter that felt too stiff to actually be clean, a nightstand with a lamp that flickered when we first switched it on, and a bathroom tucked into the corner by the door. The bathroom had the kind of tile floor that always feels cold no matter how long the heat has been running. The sink had faint water stains, and the shower curtain was just slightly yellowed at the bottom from mildew that cleaning crews never managed to fully scrub away. It wasn't gross enough to complain about, just the kind of grime you expect from a cheap place that survives off budget travelers and people who need a roof for the night. We didn't even talk much after getting in. My boyfriend dropped onto the bed, pulled the covers up, and was out in minutes. I sat on the edge of the mattress for a while scrolling on my phone, trying to unwind from the drive. The room had that heavy silence that only hotels have, where it's not really silent, because you can faintly hear other people's TVs through the walls, or the occasional thud of footsteps down the hall, but it's still so much quieter than home that it makes every little sound stand out more. Eventually, I decided to shower. I remember padding across the cold tile floor of the bathroom barefoot, shivering a little as I undressed. The bathroom mirror had those faint streaks across it from a cloth that wasn't fully clean, and the fluorescent light above gave off a pale, almost sickly glow. I turned on the shower, twisting the knob all the way toward hot, because I knew it would take a minute for the water to warm up. I was standing there, arms crossed, watching steam just start to rise when it happened. I felt a hand on my right shoulder. Not a brush, not a faint touch, but a real hand pressing down, the weight of it unmistakable. Firm enough that I froze immediately, every muscle in my body locking up. My first thought was simple, that my boyfriend had gotten up behind me. I didn't even flinch at first because it seemed so logical. He must have woken up, come in quietly, and for some reason laid his hand there. I turned around to face him, expecting to see him half awake, maybe with a sleepy grin, maybe messing with me. But there was no one. The bathroom was empty. I froze in that spot, my heart hammering. The door to the bathroom was still shut. I hadn't heard it open. I quickly leaned out, peeking around the corner, expecting maybe he had laid his hand there, and then darted back out to mess with me. I had this mental picture of him trying to prank me, running back to bed as fast as he could. But when I looked across the room, there he was, still in bed, still under the covers. The blankets were heavy on him, rising and falling slowly with his breathing. He was on his side, mouth slightly open, letting out that faint soft snore he always had when he was dead asleep. He hadn't moved. There was no way he could have laid his hand on my shoulder and been back under the covers, already in that deep rhythm of sleep, in the few seconds it took me to turn around. That was the moment my stomach dropped. The kind of drop you get on a roller coaster, only sharper, worse. A dizzy, sinking sensation that made the edges of my vision blur for a second. It wasn't just fear. It was confusion so strong it felt physical. My brain was scrambling to make sense of it and coming up with nothing. I stood there for longer than I can even measure. Could have been 10 seconds, could have been a full minute. My hand was still on the shower knob, hot water running behind me, filling the room with steam, but I didn't even feel it anymore. The only thing I felt was the lingering impression of that hand on my shoulder, like my skin remembered it even though nothing was there. I finally pulled back into the bathroom, shut the door, and locked it. I don't know why. I already knew he hadn't been the one to touch me, but locking the door gave me something to do, some small sense of control. I leaned against the sink, staring at my reflection. My face was pale, my eyes wide, and I remember noticing how weirdly sharp the fluorescent light made everything look. I debated not showering at all, just crawling into bed and pulling the covers over me, but the thought of climbing in next to him, still damp with sweat and dirt from the day, made me push through. I got into the shower, kept the curtain half open, so I could still see the bathroom, and rushed through the fastest shower of my life. Every sound made me jump. The pipes knocking, the water hitting the floor, even the faint hum of the fan above the light. It all felt wrong, like any second I'd feel that hand again. When I was done, I turned off the water, dried off quickly, and stepped out with the towel still wrapped around me. I cracked the bathroom door open slowly, peering into the room, half expecting to see something waiting there. But it was just him, still asleep. The room was the same. Nothing had moved. I slipped into bed, heart still racing, and laid there staring at the ceiling. I didn't tell him what happened. I didn't even nudge him awake. There was no point. He would have just looked at me half asleep and not understood what I was trying to say. So I kept it to myself, but I couldn't sleep. Not for hours. I kept replaying it in my head, trying to explain it. Maybe it had been in my imagination, but it hadn't felt like imagination. The pressure had been too real, too clear. Maybe the stress of traveling, the exhaustion, my mind tricking me, but my body remembered it, down to the weight of the palm, the slight drag across my skin. Imaginations don't leave that kind of imprint. The hotel suddenly felt different too. Not haunted, not supernatural, just wrong. The muffled TV from another room sounded louder, like someone whispering just out of earshot. The ice machine down the hall made a clunk, and it felt like it was right outside our door. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The faint shadow of someone walking past the curtain, even though I never heard footsteps. A creak above us, like someone was pacing in the room upstairs, even though earlier I thought that floor was empty. The more I thought about the hotel, the more it made sense in a way I didn't want it to. It wasn't old, but it had the kind of energy a place builds up from the people who pass through. The addicts, the drifters, the people with nowhere else to go. You could feel it in the walls, in the carpet, in the stale air. Hotels like that collect things. Not ghosts, not anything supernatural, but pieces of people. The stress, the anger, the desperation. All of it lingers in ways you don't expect. I never felt the hand again that night, but the unease never left. I didn't drift off until the sky outside the curtains started to lighten. Even then, it was a shallow, restless kind of sleep, and the second I opened my eyes again, I wanted to leave. In the morning, I didn't say much. He stretched, yawned, asked if I had slept all right, and I just nodded. I packed my bag faster than I usually do. We checked out without a word to the desk clerk, and I didn't look back when we walked out into the parking lot. Even now, I can't explain what happened in that bathroom. All I know is the way that hand felt, the solid weight of it pressing down, and the way my stomach dropped when I saw him asleep in bed. That moment of realization, knowing it couldn't have been him, was worse than the hand itself. Because it left me with nothing to hold on to, no explanation, nothing I could wrap my head around. It wasn't a ghost story, it wasn't some fairy tale. It was real, too real, and it left me with a truth I didn't want. Sometimes, things happen that you just can't explain, and the only thing you can do is carry the weight of it, remembering every detail whether you want to or not. That hotel is just another stop on the map for most people, but for me, it's where I learned that not everything can be shrugged off or rationalized. Some things just stay with you, pressed into your memory like a hand on your shoulder that never really goes away. I still remember that road trip with my mother like it was yesterday, even though years have passed. We were headed to San Diego, just the two of us, and I was maybe in my late teens. My mother has always been a very cautious woman, some might say paranoid, but I'd grown used to it by then. She had a way of looking at the world where every situation had a hidden danger, every stranger had an unknown agenda, and every place we stayed held secrets. For me, that trip became one of those moments where I realized just how much her paranoia, as I once called it, was rooted in real caution, the kind that probably kept us safe that night. The day had been long. We had started driving early in the morning, stopping only for fuel and food here and there. The sun had been baking down on the car all day, making everything feel drier, heavier. By the time we crossed into the last stretch before San Diego, my eyes were stinging from staring at the road, and my back ached from sitting in the passenger seat for hours. My mother was more resilient, but I could tell from her stiff posture that she was tired too. It was already dark by the time she admitted we couldn't push on any longer. We needed to stop somewhere. I remember the way the freeway lights cast dull yellow glows across the pavement, and how every exit we passed seemed emptier than the last. The signs would show the name of some small town I'd never heard of, and maybe a symbol for gas or food, but not much else. Finally, she pulled off at an exit where a small cluster of buildings glowed faintly against the black sky. We drove past a few fast food restaurants, and then came upon a bed and breakfast with a wooden sign swinging in the breeze. The sign was painted in faded colors, maybe once cheerful, but now chipped and worn down. The place itself looked like an old two-story house, the kind that might have been a farmhouse at some point before being turned into a business. The front porch had a few dim lamps glowing, and a rocking chair sat to one side. It was late, maybe close to 11, and I remember thinking that we just needed somewhere to sleep for a few hours before getting back on the road. My mother, though, was never the type to see things so simply. I could already feel her tension as we pulled into the gravel driveway and parked. She didn't like bed and breakfasts much, said they always felt like someone else's house instead of a business, which made them harder to trust. I didn't argue with her, not out loud anyway, but in my head I thought, it's just one night, what's the worst that could happen? We got out and stretched, the night air cool but carrying the faint smell of dust and old wood. Inside, the place was quiet. The walls were lined with old wallpaper, the kind with faint floral patterns that probably hadn't been updated in decades. The floorboards creaked under our steps as we went to the front desk, which was really just a small wooden counter at the end of the hall. An older man came out from a side room, his footsteps slow, his face marked with wrinkles and a kind of tired politeness. He wore a plain shirt and suspenders, his hair thin and white. He gave us a small smile as he handed us a key after my mother signed the logbook. There was something off in the silence of the place, though. I didn't hear any other voices, no movement from upstairs, no sound of a TV from another room. Just the faint hum of some old air conditioning system and the creaks of the house settling. I brushed it off. Our room was on the first floor, down a narrow hallway. The door stuck slightly when we pushed it open, and the room itself was simple: 2 twin beds, a dresser with a mirror, a small bathroom off to the side. The air smelled faintly musty, like old fabric that had been washed too many times. There was a lamp on the nightstand, casting a warm glow that made the room feel smaller than it was. I set my bag down and was already halfway to kicking off my shoes when my mother began her routine. I didn't think much of it at first, because I'd seen her do it countless times before. It was her way of settling in, of making sure the place wasn't hiding anything. She started with the bathroom, turning on the light and checking the shower curtain, running her hand along the edges of the tile as though expecting to find a hidden camera. She even lifted the toilet lid, looking inside the bowl, checking the tank. I sat on the bed, tired, watching her with the half-patient, half-annoyed attitude of someone who's seen the same thing over and over. Next, she moved to the smoke detector. She dragged a chair over from the corner and stood on it, peering into the small plastic device. She took it down, opened it up, examined it closely, then put it back. She did the same with the alarm clock on the nightstand, the lamp, even the TV that sat on a small stand against the wall. I remember sighing, telling myself to just wait it out. She always had to go through the motions. The last step was always the mirror. She had explained it to me once, years before. If you shine a flashlight against a regular mirror, the surface reflects the light back. But if it's a two-way mirror and there's space behind it, the light will reveal that gap. I never put much stock in it, but she never skipped this part. She turned off the lamp, plunging the room into near total darkness. The only light came faintly from the gap under the door. She pulled out her small flashlight from her purse. She always carried one, and aimed it at the mirror above the dresser. That's when I saw it. Instead of bouncing back normally, the beam seemed to pass through, lighting up something behind the glass. For a second, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting, but no. There was a faint outline of a space behind the mirror. Small, maybe the size of a closet, but definitely a space. I felt my stomach drop. I leaned forward from the bed, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The light cut through just enough to show that there was, without question, a gap behind the mirror. It wasn't just a solid wall. There was room there, hidden maybe just a few feet deep. My mother didn't say a word. She didn't have to. She turned the flashlight off, flicked the lamp back on, and her face was pale, her lips pressed tight. My chest was thumping, and every part of me wanted to ask what exactly she thought it was, but I knew. I knew she thought the same thing I did. That mirror wasn't just a mirror. Someone could stand behind it. Someone could watch. We didn't pack up neatly. We just grabbed our bags, shoved things inside without folding or sorting, and left the room as quickly as we could. The hallway was silent as we moved, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My mother's footsteps were fast, purposeful, and I matched her pace without speaking. At the front desk, the old man wasn't there anymore. The counter was empty, and the small bell sat untouched. For a second, I thought about leaving the key, but my mother kept it clutched in her hand as we went straight to the car. We didn't say anything until the doors were shut and locked. She pulled out of the driveway quickly, her eyes on the rearview mirror more than the road ahead. I glanced back once, and the house looked darker than before, the lamps on the porch dim, the windows blank. We didn't find another place to stay. Instead, she pulled into a rest area about 20 miles down the highway, and we slept in the car. It wasn't comfortable, but it was safe, or at least it felt that way compared to what we had just left behind. The next morning, the sunlight felt harsh, almost surreal, like it was shining on a different world than the one we'd run from. We didn't go back, didn't report it, didn't even talk much about it, but I never forgot the way the light had revealed that small hidden space. When I think back on it now, I don't let myself imagine what might have been in that closet-sized room. I don't picture whether someone had been standing there, silent, watching us as we unpacked. I just remember the feeling in my gut, the way my mother didn't hesitate to leave everything behind, and the certainty that we were right to go. It wasn't a ghost story, no urban legend, nothing supernatural. Just the very real, very unsettling possibility that someone had built that room for one reason: to watch. And that was enough to make me believe my mother's paranoia wasn't paranoia at all. It was instinct, the kind that saved us from spending the night in that room. We drove the rest of the way to San Diego with heavy silence, broken only by the sound of the tires on the highway. I never asked her why she didn't confront the man, or why she didn't demand an explanation. I think the answer was clear. She didn't want to give him the chance to explain. She just wanted distance. That night changed the way I looked at every hotel, every rental, every mirror. And no matter how tired I am, no matter how badly I want to just lie down and sleep, I find myself doing the same routine she always did. Because once you've seen that beam of light cut through a mirror into a hidden room, you never really stop wondering who could be on the other side. When we were restationed to New Jersey, the transition wasn't smooth. Our house wasn't ready yet, and we had to live in a hotel for a month. I thought at first it would be easy, just a temporary stay. Hotels usually felt kind of exciting to me, like a break from normal life, but this one turned into something different. The longer we stayed, the heavier the atmosphere felt, and the more little things piled up that made me feel uneasy. The hotel wasn't fancy. It was one of those extended stay places with a small kitchenette, a little dining table, a couch, and a bedroom with a door that separated it from the main space. It was meant for people exactly like us, families waiting on housing, contractors working long-term jobs, military families between moves. Everything inside was standard, nothing homey. Beige walls, dark carpet that looked like it had been vacuumed 1,000 times but still held a faint smell of old dust, and furniture that seemed sturdy but too worn to feel welcoming. It was the kind of place where you immediately knew countless people had lived before you, all passing through, leaving pieces of themselves behind. The first week passed without much thought. My then-husband brushed off everything I noticed, but even early on, I felt the place was wrong. At night, when things should have gone quiet, the hotel seemed to come alive with noises. The cupboards in our kitchenette would click open and shut. Not loudly, not slamming, just the sound of doors being pulled open, then nudged closed again. Sometimes the dining chairs scraped softly against the linoleum, the sound unmistakable. I'd sit up in bed, straining to listen, thinking maybe it was just the building settling, but deep down I knew the difference. There's a very specific sound wood makes when it drags across a floor. That's what I heard over and over. My husband always rolled his eyes when I told him. He'd mutter something about neighbors making noise, or the ventilation system moving things around. I tried to accept it, but the sounds weren't muffled. They were in our room. I could hear them close, like someone else was living alongside us. Every night, I tucked it away, told myself to get used to it. Still, it wore me down. The cats were the only thing that grounded me. They seemed to adjust fine, though I noticed they often stared at corners of the room, like they were following something I couldn't see. At the time, I chalked it up to normal cat behavior. They've always been strange little creatures, watching things with intensity, sometimes spooked by nothing. But in that hotel, their attention always seemed fixed on the same spots: the kitchenette, the closet, under the table. I didn't want to think too much about it, so I told myself it was just the stress of moving. There was one night, though, that stayed with me more than the rest. I was lying in bed, exhausted, while my husband sat in the other room watching TV. The glow from the screen cast a soft flicker down the hallway. I could see one of the cats, his silhouette outlined perfectly against the thin curtains, sitting in the window sill. He looked calm, tail flicking lazily, ears perked as he looked out into the parking lot lights. At the same time, I could hear my other cat batting something around under the bed. A faint clink, then a shuffle. It was the usual sound they made when they found a bottle cap or a twist tie. Just them playing. Nothing unusual. I was lying there, half asleep, when I heard a scratching at the door. Light, insistent scratches, the way the cats always did when they wanted to be let out. I sighed, slid out of bed, and went to open the door, expecting to see whichever cat had tired of playing inside. But when I opened it, I froze. Both cats were already out there, sitting comfortably on the couch beside my husband, their ears forward, eyes following the TV screen. The scratching had stopped the second I opened the door. My stomach dropped in that slow, heavy way that makes you dizzy. I turned back toward the bed. The space under it was sealed off by the hotel's frame, solid wood panels blocking the underside. There was no way anything could be down there. Yet I had heard it, something moving, pawing, playing just beneath me. I didn't say anything right then. I closed the door slowly, sat back down on the bed, and just stared at the frame. My heart beat heavy in my chest, and I couldn't shake the sick feeling of being tricked. It wasn't just a random sound from the pipes or walls. It had imitated the cats perfectly, right down to the scratching at the door. That's when the hotel stopped feeling like a place we were staying and started feeling like a place we were trapped. The weeks dragged on after that. The noises continued, sometimes worse, sometimes almost quiet enough to convince myself it was over. I would lie in bed, eyes wide open, listening to the faint sounds of cupboard doors shifting, chairs scraping lightly against the floor, and sometimes the soft patter of movement that sounded exactly like a cat. My husband kept brushing it all off, telling me I was worked up, tired, imagining things. But I noticed the way he sometimes woke up in the night, lying still and tense, as if he was listening too but didn't want to admit it. I felt drained all the time. My body was heavy, my mind foggy. The air in that hotel room seemed to press down on me. The lighting was always dim, even in the middle of the day, and no matter how often I tried to air it out, it felt stale. I couldn't focus, couldn't relax. Even the cats seemed restless, pacing at odd hours, meowing low at the walls. The more time passed, the more I dreaded being inside, but we had no choice. We had to wait until our house was ready. It was the longest month I can remember. It wasn't until after we moved out that my ex-husband finally admitted what I had suspected. He told me in a flat voice that he sometimes woke in the middle of the night with the sensation of a cat pawing at his chest. Not kneading, not resting, pawing, tapping insistently, the way a cat does when it wants attention. But when he opened his eyes, nothing was there. He hadn't told me then because he didn't want me to spiral deeper into fear. He wanted me to think it was all in my head, easier to brush off than face. But he admitted it in the end. He felt it too. When I think back on it now, I don't jump to ghosts or haunted hotel stories. I don't tell myself there were spirits following us around. What unsettles me most is how real it all felt. The sounds weren't vague. They were specific: cupboards, chairs, scratching, pawing. Things that matched our daily lives exactly, mimicked down to the last detail. And they were inside that room with us. Not once or twice, but nearly every night. The hotel wasn't broken down or abandoned. It wasn't some old Victorian building with a tragic history. It was a standard extended stay, bland and practical. Maybe that's why it still chills me, because if something could feel that wrong in such an ordinary place, then nowhere is really immune to it. Even now, years later, when I think about New Jersey, the first thing that comes to mind isn't the house we finally moved into. It's that hotel. The beige walls, the heavy air, the nights lying awake with my skin prickling at every sound. It wasn't dramatic or explosive, No big event to mark the experience, just a constant, pressing discomfort that never let up. The base itself felt the same, cold, unsettled, like the land beneath it carried weight no one wanted to acknowledge. I can't explain it in neat words, and I don't need to. All I know is, when we left that hotel, I felt something lift off me. Not relief exactly, but release. Like I'd been holding my breath for a month, and could finally exhale. I still remember that trip like it happened last night. It was the early 2000s, and my brother and I had decided we needed a break from everything. We thought a road trip to Las Vegas would be perfect. Just the two of us, some miles to cover, some neon lights at the end of the road. But in truth, we weren't even that interested in Vegas itself. We just wanted to get out, do something different, and see where the road would take us. By the time we got to Nevada, the desert sun had already beaten us down and we were tired, but in that tired way where you don't really want to call it quits just yet. We'd driven through the city, but the noise, the chaos, the non-stop crowds, it all felt overwhelming, and neither of us wanted to fight through it just to find a place to sleep. My brother suggested we drive further out, maybe find someplace quieter, something with a little character. That's how we ended up stumbling onto this old Western hotel, tucked away about an hour outside the main drag. It had one of those signs you'd half expect to see in an old movie, a weathered board with fading paint, the letters uneven but still hanging on. The Pioneer's Rest. It looked like the kind of place where cowboys might have tied their horses outside a century and a half earlier. The building itself looked like time had barely been kind to it. 2 stories tall, wide wooden porch wrapping around the front, slats that creaked under our feet as we walked up. The windows looked like they'd been washed but still carried that permanent film you get from desert wind and dust storms. When we stepped inside, the air was cooler but heavy, with that old building smell, a mix of wood, plaster, and something faintly metallic like rust or maybe the residue of tools left behind from construction. The woman at the front desk was polite, but looked more relieved than welcoming. She told us we were the first guests they'd had since reopening after renovations. Said they hadn't been open for a long time, and we'd have the whole place to ourselves for the night. I remember exchanging a quick glance with my brother at that, just the two of us in a building that old, in the middle of nowhere. It was almost exciting at first. The novelty of it made it sound fun, like something you'd brag about later. But as we walked to our room, dragging our bags down the long hallway, that excitement started to feel more like unease. The halls stretched longer than they looked from outside. The carpet was clean but thin, the kind where your footsteps land harder than you expect. The wallpaper had been redone, but you could still see the unevenness beneath, like the past was still trying to bleed through. And there was this silence that wasn't comforting. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your ears until you were hyper-aware of your own breathing, your own footsteps, every little shift in the air. When we got to our room, it was simple. 2 beds, an old dresser, a table with a single chair. The bathroom was small, the kind where you couldn't turn without bumping into something. The beds looked clean enough, sheets tucked tight, but there was nothing about the place that made you feel settled. It was all just a little too bare, too stiff, like it was meant to look nice but had no warmth in it. We didn't stay in the room long. My brother suggested we explore a little, see what the rest of the place was like. So we walked the halls, poked our heads into the empty dining room, found the staircase that led down to the basement level. The further we went, the more that feeling of being watched settled in. I kept glancing behind me, half expecting someone to be there. But it was always just empty halls, doors shut, light fixtures humming quietly overhead. When we found the ballroom in the basement, we didn't even make it past the doorway. The second we stepped inside, both of us froze. The room was massive but dark, the corners swallowed in shadow even with the overhead lights on. The air was cooler down there, and not in a refreshing way, more like the air that hangs in a place that's been closed off too long. We stood there just long enough to feel the weight of it pressing in, both of us tense, before my brother muttered something about heading back. We didn't even have to agree. We both turned and left almost at the same time, moving quicker than we meant to. Back in the room, things felt a little lighter, but that sense of being watched never really left. We distracted ourselves with TV, made some small talk, but when it came time to turn the lights off, I lay there staring at the ceiling longer than I'd like to admit. Eventually, I must have dozed off. What woke me later wasn't a dream, but the sound of the door opening. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to snap me awake. My eyes shot open, and my whole body went stiff. For a second, I thought maybe my brother had gotten up. But when I turned my head, he was still in his bed, sound asleep. His breathing was steady, slow, the kind of deep sleep where you know they're not faking it. That's when I felt it. The shift in the mattress at the foot of my bed. It wasn't subtle. It sank under weight, the way it does when someone sits down. My chest tightened so much I could barely breathe. Every instinct in me screamed not to move, not to make a sound, but the terror was so overwhelming I couldn't hold it in. My hands gripped the blanket, and I pulled it up over my head like a child, my throat tight, eyes burning with tears I didn't want to cry. I could feel the weight move, slow, deliberate. From the foot of the bed, up towards where my legs were, closer to my chest. Each shift pressed the mattress just slightly, enough that there was no mistaking it. I was shaking under the blanket, biting my lip to stop from sobbing out loud. I wanted to scream for my brother, but I couldn't force the sound out. And then just like that, the pressure lifted. The mattress eased back up, the way it does when someone gets off. A few seconds later, I heard the door. Not slammed, not even pulled quickly, just the quiet click of it shutting, like someone had opened it, left, and pulled it closed behind them. I stayed under the blanket for what felt like hours, my heart hammering so hard it almost hurt. My brother never stirred. When I finally dared to peek out, the room was empty, silent again, the door shut. I didn't sleep another second that night. I sat there, eyes darting to every corner of the room, listening to every creak of the old building, waiting for it to happen again. When the sun finally came up, I was out of bed before my brother even moved. I threw my bag together and told him we needed to leave. He could see it in my face. I didn't have to explain. We checked out without saying a word to the woman at the front desk. The whole drive back, I kept replaying it in my head. I wanted some rational explanation, bad dreams, sleep paralysis, maybe even a trick of the old mattress. But I hadn't been dreaming. I hadn't been half awake. I had been fully awake, frozen, listening to the door, feeling the weight of someone, or something, sitting on my bed. And no matter how badly I wanted it to make sense, it never did. To this day, I don't know what happened in that room. Maybe someone on the staff thought it was funny to mess with us, knowing we were the only ones there. Maybe the old locks didn't hold as well as they should have. Or maybe it was just one of those moments you'll never fully explain, no matter how much you want to. All I know is I've never felt fear like that again, and I've never stayed in a hotel that old ever since. Some experiences burn themselves into you, and that night in the desert is one I'll never forget. Alright, so my aunt had to move out of her house because the whole place had gotten infested with black mold. It was bad, the kind of thing where it wasn't just a couple patches on the wall, but spreading through the insulation, creeping behind the drywall, up into the ceiling, down into the basement. The state stepped in and basically told her it wasn't safe to live there until it was gutted and rebuilt. They gave her a hotel to stay in while the work was done, and what was supposed to be a couple weeks stretched into nearly 3 months. I remember the first night she checked in. She was nervous, the way some people get about hotels. She never liked sleeping in a place that wasn't her own, always said she didn't trust people in the hallways, didn't like how thin the doors seemed, how anyone with a key card could just walk in. My sister and I decided to stay with her, just to make it easier on her, keep her company, and make sure she felt safe. The hotel itself wasn't bad. From the outside, it looked like a pretty average mid-range chain, maybe a little worn down around the edges, but nothing filthy or falling apart. Lobby had a faint smell of chlorine from the indoor pool, mixed with whatever lemon-scented cleaner the staff used on the floors. Bright lights, a couple fake plants in ceramic pots, and a big TV mounted near the check-in desk that was always tuned to some news channel with the volume turned down. They put my aunt on the ground floor, which she hated from the start. She would have felt better up high, where no one could walk past her window, but I think the hotel was close to full, and ground floor was all they had. The room itself wasn't terrible. 2 queen beds, a desk and chair, a little armchair in the corner. A flat screen bolted to the wall across from the beds. The curtains were the thick kind that could block almost all light, and behind them was a sliding glass window that looked out onto a narrow strip of grass separating the building from the parking lot. We tried to settle in. My sister claimed 1 bed, I shared with my aunt. We watched TV for a while, some old sitcom reruns, before turning it off. My aunt fussed with her bag, laid out her pills and her phone charger, things like that, just trying to make it feel like she wasn't in some strange temporary space. Eventually the lights went out, and we all tried to sleep. It must have been close to midnight when the first sound started. At first I thought it was just something in the hall, maybe somebody dragging a suitcase. But then it came again, softer this time, more like a light scratching sound near the window. My aunt shifted beside me, not saying anything, but I could tell she heard it too. My sister rolled over, muttered something half asleep. The noise stopped, then came back a few minutes later, more insistent this time. A faint tapping, not steady, but every so often. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening. I thought maybe it was just tree branches brushing against the glass, but when I remembered the strip of grass outside, I realized there were no trees close enough. Finally, I pushed back the blanket and got up. The carpet felt rough under my bare feet, and the room was cold enough that I felt goosebumps rise on my arms. I went to the window, pulled at the heavy curtain just enough to peek outside. What I saw made my stomach drop. There was a man standing right there in the narrow patch of grass, so close his breath could have fogged the glass if it were cold enough. His clothes were dirty, his face drawn and gaunt, hair patchy like it hadn't been washed in weeks. But what he was doing was the worst part. He had himself out, alternating between pissing on the side of the building and touching himself. His eyes weren't exactly focused on anything, but every now and then they shifted toward the window like he knew we were there. I froze for a second, just staring, my brain struggling to process it. Then my aunt sat up behind me and caught a glimpse. She let out a scream, sharp and panicked, and that jolted me into moving. I yanked the curtain shut so she wouldn't see him anymore, but the image was already burned into my mind. My aunt's voice cracked as she kept yelling, panicking in a way I hadn't seen before. My sister sat bolt upright, eyes wide. My own pulse was racing, adrenaline making my chest feel tight. I wanted to protect my aunt, to do something about the man outside, but all I could do was stand there, frozen between the bed and the window. I finally forced myself to speak, low and angry, telling him through the glass to get the hell out of there, threatening him if he didn't leave. My voice didn't even sound like mine. It was shaking but sharp, trying to sound braver than I felt. That must have been loud enough because the noise carried, and soon there was a knock at the door. For one terrifying moment I thought it was him, that he'd circled around, but it was hotel staff. They had heard the commotion. My aunt was still crying, my sister shaking, and I just stood there trying to explain. They called security, then the police. By then the man had wandered a few steps away, but was still in the parking lot, muttering to himself. When the officers came, they moved fast, cornering him before he could go far. The way they handled it told me they'd seen him before, or at least people like him. Later, I found out he was a meth addict who had only been released from prison hours earlier. They said he was usually harmless, just completely out of his element. That didn't matter to me, though. That night, with him outside our window, he didn't look harmless at all. He looked like someone who could have done anything if the glass hadn't been there. The hotel didn't waste time moving my aunt to another room, this time on an upper floor. We packed up quickly, my hands still shaking as I shoved our things into bags. The staff kept apologizing, trying to smooth things over, promising compensation. I think they gave my aunt some kind of discount for the trouble, maybe even extra nights covered, though the details blur together now. My sister and I ended up with a free buffet dinner at the hotel restaurant, which felt almost ridiculous compared to what had happened, but we were hungry and ate it anyway. That night has never left me. Even now, years later, when I stay in hotels, I double-check the windows, make sure the curtains are pulled tight. I prefer higher floors, far from the ground where anyone can walk past. I remember the way my aunt's scream sounded, the way my heart pounded in my ears, the sick twist in my gut when I saw him standing there. It wasn't the kind of horror you see in movies, no ghosts or shadows in the corners, no monsters lurking under the bed. It was worse in a way, because it was real. A person, unpredictable and broken, right outside the glass. A reminder that sometimes the scariest things don't come from imagination. They come from the people you least expect, in the places where you should feel safe. And though the hotel did their best to make it right, though the police took him away, that memory has never faded. It stays with me, sharp as ever, every time I draw a curtain closed. I had been planning the bike trip for months, mapping out every stretch of road, every stop I would take, and where I would spend the night. It was the kind of ride I had wanted to do for years, pushing myself further than I ever had before, from Grand Haven all the way up to Mackinac City. I knew it was going to be a grind, but I also knew it was the kind of trip you don't forget once you've done it. Traverse City was supposed to be one of the easier stops. I had booked a cheap hotel room there, nothing fancy, just somewhere I could get a shower, a solid meal, and a bed. That night was supposed to be a chance for me to rest up before the longer ride north. The hotel wasn't anything special. I think it used to be a day's inn, but I'm pretty sure it had just been bought out by some country and company. The kind of place with the same brown carpet and beige walls you find in any roadside hotel. When I rolled in, sweaty and sore, I was too tired to care about much else. The parking lot was half full, a couple other cars and some trucks, but quiet. I checked in, wheeled my bike up to the room, and went through the routine of showering, stretching, and laying out everything for the next day. My body ached in that deep way it does after hours of cycling, but it felt good too, like I'd earned the exhaustion. I remember the room clearly. It had 2 queen beds with stiff patterned comforters, a little round table with 2 chairs, a dresser with a flat screen bolted to the wall above it, and the kind of curtains that never fully close no matter how much you pull on them. The air conditioner rattled when it kicked on, but it kept the room cool, and that was all I cared about. By the time it got close to bed, I had the lights off, just the glow of the iPad lighting the room as I laid back against the pillows. I probably shouldn't admit it, but I was being a little lazy and messing around online, looking at porn to wind down. It wasn't exactly part of the noble cyclist lifestyle, but it passed the time and gave me something to distract me from the soreness in my legs. After a while, I felt the sleepiness hitting me hard. I set the iPad down on the nightstand, closed my eyes, and was just starting to drift. That's when it happened. The whole room exploded in light. A bright blue flash, so sudden and intense it felt like the sun had gone off inside the 4 walls. It was like a camera flash times 100, the kind that burns your eyes even when your eyelids are shut. For a split second I thought maybe lightning had hit right outside, but the curtains were completely drawn, thick hotel curtains that no outside light should have pierced through. And this wasn't white lightning, it was blue, electric, unnatural. My eyes snapped open, and I shot upright in bed with my heart hammering. The room looked the same, but the afterimage of that flash still burned in my vision. I stared at the curtains, convinced I'd see daylight pouring through, but it was still pitch black beyond them. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound. I sat frozen, listening, waiting for something else. But nothing came. The first thought that hit me was a camera. Someone had taken a picture. The idea clawed its way into my head and wouldn't let go. I jumped out of bed and went straight to the window, yanking the curtains apart. The parking lot sat under its dim orange lights, empty except for a handful of cars. No one standing there, no one aiming a flash at my window. That should have calmed me, but it didn't. The brightness had felt too close. It hadn't come from outside. It had filled the room. I turned back, scanning every surface like I'd suddenly been dropped into someone else's space. The mirrors were the first thing that caught my eye. There was one over the dresser and another in the bathroom. I stood in front of the bigger one, shining the iPad flashlight at it, pressing my face close like I'd see through into another room. My mind kept cycling through all the stories I'd ever read about one-way mirrors and hidden cameras in hotels. My skin crawled at the thought of someone watching me, recording me. I ended up yanking the mirror off the wall. It was heavier than I expected, and the drywall anchors ripped out as I pulled, leaving ragged holes behind. Behind it, nothing. Just beige drywall, no hollow space, no wires, no lens glinting in the light. I leaned it against the wall and moved to the bathroom mirror, doing the same thing. Same result. Empty wall. But I couldn't let it go. I tore through the room like a madman. I pulled the dresser away from the wall, pulled the cushions off the chairs, checked the lamp shades, unscrewed the bulbs, even lifted the mattress. I dug into every corner, every vent, even popped the smoke detector off the ceiling. Nothing. No wires, no cameras, no weird electronics that could have lit up like that. An hour passed like that. My body shook with a mix of exhaustion and adrenaline, but I couldn't stop. Every time I paused, I saw that flash in my mind again, lighting the whole room like some invisible photographer had caught me in the middle of something private. Eventually, there was nothing left to check. I sat on the edge of the bed, sweaty and breathing hard, the room torn apart around me. I stared at the blank walls and tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was some kind of electrical surge, I told myself. Maybe the old wiring in the hotel had sparked, or the fluorescent light outside my room had blown. But the curtains had been shut tight. That light had been inside. I knew what I'd seen. I thought about packing up, getting back on the bike, riding until sunrise just to get away. But I was too tired. My legs wouldn't have made it 10 miles. So I did the only thing I could. I left every single light in the room on. Bathroom light, lamp lights, even the TV on low volume. I put my clothes back on, shoes included, and laid back down on top of the comforter. I didn't close my eyes for a long time. Every shadow felt like it was waiting to burst into another flash. But it never came. I stayed like that until the sun finally pushed its way through the curtains, the pale natural light finally drowning out the artificial glare of the lamps. Only then did I let myself breathe. I checked out that morning without saying a word to the front desk. What was I supposed to tell them? That their rooms exploded in blue light for no reason? They would have shrugged and said they'd never heard of such a thing, and I'd still be the only one who knew what I saw. I rode out of Traverse City that day, but the memory of that night stuck with me. It still does. I've stayed in plenty of hotels since, but I always check the mirrors now. I always pull at the fixtures, glance at the smoke detectors, look twice at the curtains. I tell myself it was just faulty wiring, just some kind of electrical surge bouncing off the walls. That's the only explanation that makes any kind of sense. But deep down, I know what I saw. A blue flash that filled the room from nowhere, bright as the sun, like someone had been watching and chose that moment to let me know. And even though I never found a single piece of proof, I can still feel it, burned into my memory like the afterimage of a camera bulb. That night changed the way I look at hotel rooms. You think you're alone in those spaces, sealed off from the world for a few hours of rest. But you're not. You can't ever be completely sure what's behind those walls, what's built into the fixtures, or if something unseen is waiting to remind you just how exposed you really are. And so, even now, years later, when I check into a hotel, I never sleep in the dark. I'll never forget that night. Even now, years later, when I'm lying awake in bed and the room is silent, my mind drifts back to that hotel room. It wasn't supposed to be anything memorable. It was just another stop on a trip, a random place to sleep for the night. The kind of place you check into, drop your bags, head out for the evening, and then come back to collapse into bed. That was all it was supposed to be. But it didn't turn out that way. We had gotten to the hotel in the late afternoon. It wasn't one of those fancy places, not a chain I recognized. Just a tall, older-looking building with heavy doors and dim lighting in the lobby. The kind of place that feels like it's been standing there for decades, patched up and painted over, but still carrying a sense of something worn down underneath the surface. The carpet in the halls had that stiff, overused texture, like it had been vacuumed a million times but never really cleaned. The kind of carpet that muffled footsteps and swallowed sound. When we first stepped into the room, nothing stood out as unusual. It was just a hotel room. 2 beds with heavy, tucked-in blankets, a little table against the wall, a TV bolted into a corner, a closet with sliding doors. There was a small desk and chair, and one of those hotel lamps that never gives enough light, so half the room stayed in shadow even with it switched on. The curtains were thick, heavy, patterned with something I can't even remember anymore, but I know they were the kind that could block out sunlight completely. I put my backpack down near the side of the bed I'd chosen, right on the floor by my side. I always kept it close. Everything important to me was in there, my wallet, keys, some personal stuff. I didn't think much about it at the time. My husband had tossed his bag on the chair by the desk. We freshened up and decided not to hang around in the room. We locked the door behind us, heard the heavy click of the locks sliding into place, and left for the evening. The night was normal. We grabbed dinner, walked around town a little, just enjoying ourselves. Nothing about it put me on edge. By the time we came back, it was late. The hotel was quieter, the hallways practically dead. I remember the way our footsteps echoed faintly off the walls as we walked to our room. The door was still locked tight when we got back. We went inside, and everything was exactly where we'd left it. We changed, brushed our teeth, and turned out the lights. The darkness was immediate, thick. That room had no slivers of light slipping under the door or through the curtains. When the lamps were off, it was total blackness, the kind where you can't see your own hand, even if it's right in front of your face. We laid down, and soon the room was filled with the soft hum of the air conditioner and the occasional creak of the building settling. At some point in the night, I woke up. I couldn't say why. There wasn't a dream that startled me, or any sudden sound that I could remember. I just opened my eyes and realized I was awake, lying in a darkness so deep it almost felt like something pressing against me. I stayed still listening, and then I heard it. It wasn't loud, but it was close. A faint, deliberate sound, sharp against the silence. At first I thought it was just the air conditioner making some odd noise, but then I realized it wasn't coming from across the room. It was right near my side of the bed, right near where my backpack sat on the floor. The sound was one I recognized instantly, though it took my mind a second to process it. A zipper. My backpack's zipper. Slowly, carefully, it was being drawn back. Teeth separating in the dark. I froze. My whole body locked up. For a moment, I thought maybe I was dreaming, half asleep and imagining it. But then it came again, longer this time. The unmistakable metallic rasp of the zipper being pulled, followed by the faint shuffle of fabric moving. And then another sound. The soft, muffled noise of something being shifted inside. Someone, or something, was going through my bag. The bed felt impossibly small in that moment. I lay on my side, facing the direction of my backpack, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. My husband's warmth was behind me, the steady weight of him in the bed. I thought about waking him, but my body wouldn't move. It was like every muscle was locked tight. Fear pinned me in place. I lay there, barely breathing, listening as the rummaging continued. The sound wasn't rushed. Whoever or whatever it was seemed to take their time. A zipper tugged a little more. Fabric shifted again. Something was picked up and then put back down. Each sound was so clear in the silence that it felt like the whole room was amplifying it straight into my ears. Time dragged on. I don't know how long it lasted. Maybe minutes, maybe longer. My sense of time was gone. All I could think about was how close it was, just a few feet from me, and how utterly helpless I felt. My hand was inches from my husband's shoulder, but I didn't dare move. I was afraid that even the smallest shift would draw attention to me, that whatever was there would turn its focus from the bag to me. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The zipper sound ceased. The shuffling ended. The room was silent again, except for the hum of the air conditioner and the pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. I stayed frozen, waiting for something else, waiting for movement, but nothing came. The silence stretched on endlessly, heavy and oppressive. I didn't sleep after that. I couldn't. I stayed there, eyes open in the dark, staring into nothing, my body rigid under the covers. Every creak of the building, every shift of air from the vent, made me tense up, waiting for the noise to start again. But it never did. When the faintest light finally began to leak around the edges of the curtains, I felt a rush of relief. The darkness started to loosen its grip on the room, and the shapes of furniture slowly returned. My body ached from lying stiff all night, but I finally forced myself to move. I turned my head toward the spot where I had left my backpack. My stomach dropped when I saw it. It wasn't beside the bed anymore. It was all the way across the room, near the desk. The zipper was partly open, the flap slightly gaping, and some of my things were sticking out, like someone had pulled them out and shoved them back carelessly. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't my imagination. Something, or someone, had gone through my bag. The door was still locked when I checked it. Both locks, even the latch we'd set, were still in place. The windows were sealed shut too. There was no way in or out that made sense. And yet my bag was across the room, clearly rifled through. I sat on the edge of the bed in the daylight, staring at it, my hands trembling. I didn't know what to think. All I knew was that something had been in the room with us that night. I had heard it. I had felt it. And now I could see the proof with my own eyes. We didn't stay another night. We packed up and left that morning, checking out as quickly as possible. I didn't look back when we walked down the hallway, didn't glance over my shoulder as we stepped out into the brightness of the day. I just wanted to be gone, and we never went back to that hotel again. Even now, I can still hear that sound if I let myself think about it. The slow, steady pull of a zipper opening in the dark, far too close to where I should have felt safe. And the worst part is knowing it wasn't a dream. It happened. Something was in that room with us, and I'll never understand how. My dad and I rented this motel room in Garden City, just outside of Savannah, Georgia. It was $50 a night, which already told me more than I wanted to know. Cheap motels are cheap for a reason, but we didn't really have much of a choice that evening. We had been driving for hours, tired and restless, and every other place nearby was either full or way out of our budget. The GPS led us down dimly lit roads, past empty parking lots and industrial yards, until finally the motel came into view, glowing faintly with a half-dead sign buzzing above the entrance. The first thing I noticed was that the lobby wasn't connected to the motel itself. It sat on its own, a small building off to the side, like someone had dropped a cheap office trailer in the middle of a lot and called it reception. The actual motel was behind it, a looming block of concrete that looked more like an abandoned dormitory than a place where people were supposed to sleep. Paint peeled from the walls, windows were clouded with grime, and only a few dim lights glowed in the hallways. Still, we were too tired to argue. My dad parked the truck, and we went inside to check in. The lobby was nothing to brag about either. The air smelled faintly of bleach, but not enough to make it feel clean. Behind the counter, a middle-aged woman stared at us without expression, sliding a paper logbook across for my dad to sign. No computers, no card scanner, just a pen and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She took the money in cash, counted it twice, then handed us a key on a ring that looked like it belonged to a high school janitor. No instructions, no small talk, just a nod toward the building outside. We drove around and parked near the entrance of the motel building. The closer we got, the worse it looked. The front double doors were gone. One of them lay flat on the ground, splintered at the edges like it had been kicked off months ago and never fixed. The other was hanging on a hinge, swinging slightly in the night breeze. It felt wrong just stepping over the door like that, but we didn't have another option. My dad gave me a look that said, "Don't say anything," so I stayed quiet and followed him inside. The staircase was the first thing we saw. The railings were loose, and the steps were stained with what looked like years of spilled drinks, mud, and who knows what else. A broken card reader hung from the wall near the door, wires sticking out like veins. Someone had spray-painted a large black X over the window at the landing. The X looked deliberate, too precise to be graffiti. My chest felt tight as we climbed the stairs, the sound of our boots echoing through the empty building. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched out in both directions. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, buzzing like angry insects. The walls were covered in this dull, yellowing wallpaper that reminded me of an old hospital, and the carpet under our feet was stained dark in random patches. The strangest part was how much it looked like the hallway from The Shining, that endless corridor of identical doors stretching forward. It wasn't just similar, it was almost exact, and that alone made me uneasy. We weren't alone either. About halfway down the hall, two men stood leaning in the doorway of one of the rooms. They weren't talking, just standing there watching. Their clothes hung loose, their faces shadowed under the flickering lights. As soon as they noticed us, they jerked upright like they'd been caught doing something, then bolted in opposite directions. One ducked into a room farther down, the other disappeared around the corner. Neither said a word, and the silence they left behind made my skin crawl. My dad kept walking fast, like he hadn't seen a thing. I hurried to keep up. We finally found our room, the number barely hanging on the door. The key fought the lock, grinding before it gave way. When we stepped inside, the smell hit me first, stale air mixed with mildew, a heavy dampness that clung to everything. The room was small, smaller than I thought possible. It could barely fit the bed inside, and there was almost no space to move. The walls were bare, painted a dull gray, and there was a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling with no shade around it. The bulb gave off a sickly yellow glow, swinging slightly even though the air was still. It felt more like a prison cell than a motel room. My dad set his bag down with a sigh. He looked exhausted, shoulders slumped, eyes tired. For a second, it seemed like he was ready to just deal with it, sleep for a few hours, and leave in the morning. But then he pulled back the blanket on the bed, and his whole body stiffened. There, near the corner of the mattress, was a massive rusty brown stain. It was the kind of stain you didn't want to think too hard about, because the possibilities were too awful. My dad shuddered, dropped the blanket, and stepped back. But I couldn't stop myself. I pulled the blanket back further, uncovering the rest of the mattress. My stomach flipped. The entire left side of it was soaked through with an even larger stain, brown and ugly, like someone had spilled gallons of something and just left it there to rot. It wasn't just a corner, it wasn't something you could ignore, it was the whole bed. I couldn't even bring myself to touch it again. I just stood there, frozen, staring at the mess. That was enough. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. My dad grabbed his bag, and I followed him out. We didn't bother locking the door. We didn't even look back at the hallway. We ran down the stairs, out the broken entrance, and straight to the truck. The night air outside felt like freedom, but it didn't calm me. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see those two men following us, or someone leaning out of one of the windows. My dad jammed the keys into the ignition, the truck roared to life, and we sped out of the parking lot. We didn't stop until we were miles away, the glowing sign of that place shrinking in the rearview mirror until it was gone. Only then did my dad slow down. Neither of us spoke for a long time. I think we were both trying to process what we had just seen, what we had stepped into. The cheap price suddenly made sense, and I couldn't shake the feeling that people didn't just sleep there, they disappeared there. That night, we ended up pulling over at a gas station and sleeping in the truck. It was cramped and uncomfortable, but I didn't care. I would have slept in the dirt before going back to that room. My only regret, and I still think about it, is that we didn't take pictures. But my dad was too afraid to turn around. He didn't want evidence, didn't want to risk being noticed or remembered by whoever ran that place. And honestly, I don't blame him. Even now, I can still see that massive stain when I close my eyes, and I wonder what really happened in that room. We never spoke of it again. The next morning, we drove straight out of Garden City, like we were fleeing something we couldn't name. The motel faded into memory, but it still lingers in the back of my mind. I know what we saw, and I know why we ran. Some places you just don't stay. Some doors you step over, but never go back through. That was one of them.